Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Veil and the Thread podcast. We are mother and daughter team. I'm Sarah, the daughter.
And I'm Elizabeth, the mother.
Okay, so today we're talking about the shadow self, which is an absolutely humongous subject, which, we were just talking briefly before this podcast about what a big subject it is. Um, Obviously, you know that the shadow self and, kind of working in the shadow is something that's been of particular interest for me the last couple of years. But it's something that is it fair to say you're still fairly new to?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you being you like to research everything very deeply and understand it very deeply, which I believe you've been doing the last couple of weeks. So, why don't you tell us what summary you've come to from your days and weeks of research into the shadow?
Well, I will tell you this. I have been down the rabbit hole, back out and back down it again several times.
Mm-hmm.
And each time I think I've grasped what it means to do shadow work and then, got myself tangled up in it all.
Okay.
And so, but I very much feel that when we're talking about the shadow self, that for me, it's more of a positive. Everything, so in my mind now, everything to do with the shadow self, I'm looking at it from a positive perspective. I think to begin with, I took the attitude that I think a lot of people probably are pulled into of, oh, it's about the bad side of yourself, the greedy or the jealous or the envious or the part of you that you want to subdue and keep down because you don't want to be associated with that negative, horrible um, part of yourself, parts of yourself. And so they are to be challenged until you become a whole and beautiful, positive person. And so that's the first rabbit hole I went down. And then when I came back out and went down another rabbit hole, that kind of showed me that no, we're talking about a shadow self that is working in your best interests. It's all positive. It's saying, look, here I am. For whatever reason, through childhood, through the way you're socialized, the way you've been educated, parental influence, societal influence, there's huge parts of your personality that have been repressed, you know, and they need to come out and be shown the light of day because by being repressed, they're not working in your best interest.
I think you've hit on one major feature of the shadow self, which, as you say, I think the majority of people read about the shadow self and, like you said, immediately think, oh, that's all of the negative stuff of me or the people in my life. And, I think they then, as I think most people do at the beginning of the shadow work journey, believe that the aim is to get rid of what they're experiencing in their shadow self. So, like you said, those emotions of jealousy or anger or envy. People think to be a good whole person, I have to work really hard at completely eliminating that. And I don't, from my study of the shadow, I don't believe that that's the point. And in fact, if you've been looking at the shadow self over the past couple of weeks, you might have come across a quote from Carl Jung, and we might have even mentioned it in the previous podcast of, only by understanding your shadow and integrating it do you become whole. And I think And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm by far an expert on the shadow self, but one of the things that I still struggle with is understanding that yes, there's a way of integrating that shadow without eliminating it, and it's still being there, because really it kind of has to be, right. We're living in a universe of duality, which is reflected within us. We have the light, we have the dark. It's not our ultimate aim to eliminate one or the other, but rather to integrate them and understand it. So where what have you found in your research about that, about the fact that we have to try and integrate those denser frequencies of the self? We're not aiming to get rid of them, we're aiming to understand them and integrate them. What have you come across
Yeah,
with that?
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. And I find it easier to give examples, really. I've been looking at my own shadow traits, and we talked about one of them before in a previous podcast, where I think I shared with you that I don't like it when people raise money for charity. They do lots of good charity work and then have to tell absolutely everybody
Oh,
what they've done, how much they've raised,
it
and
really bothers you, doesn't
it
it?
really, really bothers me. But I don't know if, yeah, in fact, I think you might have pointed out, then what is it within you that
Hmm.
that triggers you? And I think you actually explained to me that it's because they're being quite boastful and, showing off about what they've done. And it triggers me because I've worked my whole life. Well, I won't say my whole life, but as a child and a young adult, I worked to be invisible.
Mm.
I didn't want to be seen. I feared being seen because that often equated with being racially abused, you know, uh, or it would end up with me being targeted in some way.
Or a clip round the ear from a parent.
Oh yeah, yeah, or some adult, in the
Yeah.
community. So you kind of learn to lie low and become invisible amongst the adults. And
Hmm.
so what you helped me to understand is that the reason why people like that trigger me is because I have suppressed that part of me for so long that I won't let myself be seen. And what the trigger is saying to you, or your shadow self is saying, look, it's safe to be seen. You don't have to be extreme like that person, but it's okay for you to show yourself to other people and
Yeah,
let
and I
them know that you're
guess
there.
I guess the reason why, because people might say, well, if if that's what that particular person is showing in you, because what we have to remember is, although that's your story of this is why I don't like boastful people, because I worked so hard to remain unseen, that's not
Yeah.
necessarily the exact same lesson for somebody else that is triggered by boastful people, right? You have to kind of do, this is what shadow work's
Yes.
about. It's about sitting with it and thinking, why is that triggering to me specifically, rather than it just being a cookie cutter solution for
Yeah.
everybody. But what I was going to say was, I guess the reason why we have to experience those personalities in such a strong way is because if we came across somebody who gave to charity and felt pride within themselves for doing that and for being a good person, but perhaps not really being super boastful about it, then that wouldn't highlight anything to you, then would it? Because you'd probably be
No.
like, oh, that person gives to charity, that's great. And you know what? They're really humble about it too. Fantastic. But actually, the reason you have to experience that such a strong personality is because you have to recognize it's almost like a lighthouse in the fog, isn't it? That light, that personality has to be strong enough for you to identify that your shadow self is trying to show you you have an issue with this, you need to figure out why. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, absolutely. Because who am I to be looking at somebody who I think is boastful and seeing that as something that's wrong and they shouldn't be doing it? If that's what they want to do, they've raised a lot of money and they want everybody to know about it, and that brings them pleasure, then that's their prerogative. It's not
Mm-hmm.
mine.
Mm.
So, so I have to work at not allowing that to trigger me. And the way to do that is to allow myself to be a little bit more out there and seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit because we kind of jumped straight into the shadow stuff, and I know that we have mentioned him before, but not everybody might be aware that Carl Jung is obviously one of the biggest authorities on the
Yeah,
shadow
yeah,
self, and
yeah,
he himself. I have a lot of respect for Carl Jung, for a lot of reasons. One being the fact that he pulled away from his mentor, Freud, when
yes,
when he knew that Freud was not being honest with his findings and stuff like that, which obviously came out much later down the line. So I have a lot of respect for Carl Jung, but also what I respect about him is all of the work that he did on the shadow was actually through experimentation with his own mind and experimentation with himself. And I
yes,
mean, he was criticised heavily for that, wasn't he? And ostracised
yeah,
because his
yeah,
colleagues kind of said, "Oh, he's having a psychotic breakdown," or
yeah,
this, that, and the other. But he actually went on this really incredible, deep journey, so that we now. I don't think we would be where we are now in our understanding of the shadow self if it hadn't have been for the work that Carl Jung had put into this.
yeah. Totally
Um,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, so I think he was a fantastic person. But yeah, I mean, what else have you kind of come across in your research? Is there anything that was like a big aha moment for you, or anything that you
Um,
didn't realize about the shadow?
well, I mean, going back to Carl Jung and his philosophy, I think he did make it clear that there are people who should not be doing shadow work.
Hmm.
It's he saw it as something that could be taken up by people who are pretty kind of in tune. They're stable, mentally stable, generally. There's no psychosis or deep depression, suicidal ideology, all that very unbalancing stuff. People should stay away from it until they have reached a more equilibrium. But that, because he also said as well, it's like for many people, it's lifelong.
Hmm.
You know, you don't just realize that this is what triggers me because, and have that aha moment. It's like you've got to continually be working on it for many, many years, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I
So,
can appreciate that myself. I think because when you this analogy is used so much in this kind of therapeutic work, but that peeling of an onion, the peeling of the layers, and I don't think that's evident anywhere as much as it is within the shadow self, because you identify something, you deal with that, you peel away the layer, you understand where it's from, and then it's like, oh, well, now that's led to something else that I didn't realize about myself, or that's led to a deeper layer of something that's only now coming to the conscious. It's just like you say, it's just it's a never ending journey. And I don't mean to make that sound apocalyptic, as in, oh well, what's the point in doing this work on myself if I'm never actually going to reach the end line. But I think human beings have got so many layers of trauma, so many layers of issues, not only from their own life, but we're also then looking at past lives, and then we're also looking at what our genealogy carries from
yeah,
from both sides, you know. So I think there's probably too much within the self to completely get to the bottom of everything in one lifetime. So what do you think the end game is then to the shadow work? Do you know, if we're never gonna get to the very, very bottom of it and completely rid ourselves of the shadow, what are we doing on this journey of the shadow self?
I think it's possible, although it's a lifelong journey. Within that journey, I think it's possible to get to a happy phase within it, accepting that, I'm never going to be 100% that person. Like for me, I'm never going to be that 100% person who will say I won't get triggered by people who I find boastful. But
Mm.
what I can do is take the heat out of it, take that negative energy out of it. And when I reach that point where I can think, oh, I got triggered then, and I now understand why I got triggered. But the intensity of that trigger is maybe a reflection of how much work I still have to do on myself. So throughout life, it could be that the triggers lessen in intensity as
Yeah.
we begin to address our shadow issues.
Yeah, I guess they stop having as much of an emotional hold, and I think this is the same methodology, isn't it, as it with a lot of other therapies and a lot of talk therapies, where you don't necessarily forget about something, but you remove the emotional baggage that's tied to that issue, so you can look at it from a more unbiased kind of,
Yeah,
level-minded position. You're like, oh yeah, okay, I understand I have an issue with this, but I don't have that rise of anger or frustration or sadness, because you've taken the power out of it, you've taken the energy out of it.
yeah, yeah. And you've taken ownership, haven't you, of
Mm.
um I have to own the fact that I'm not a person who can express myself and be out there as much as I'd like to be. That's my issue. It's not their fault. Even though they're triggering me, it's not their issue, it's mine, you
Yeah,
know. So
yeah,
I shouldn't be angry with them. I should be thankful. I should be grateful.
yeah. And I think yeah, I think as well, for me, I don't know if this is the same for you, and perhaps it will be a little bit further down the line, but shadow work for me now is, it's kind of interesting and fun to a certain extent, because it's
Yeah,
almost like being a
yeah,
detective of yourself. It's like being a detective of this vessel called Sarah that is in this
yeah,
lifetime. It's like you identify something, you recognize it, you acknowledge it, and then you go, okay, I want to understand why that's even there, and how do I get to a point where it's not a controlling factor in my life? So for me, it's kind of like being a bit of a detective, really.
yes,
You know
yeah. I
what I
like
mean?
that. I like thinking of it that way. Yeah, which in a way can turn it in. I mean, not all, because there's some deeply rooted
Oh yeah, so yeah, some
things,
of it
isn't it?
is
But
yeah, some of it's very tough, and some of it's very, very heavy to deal with. And like you say, I can appreciate, Carl Jung and others talking about how this is not work that you commence with a light-hearted attitude. This is kind of, I think this is where you're at the point where you think, okay, um, I've done all of the exterior work that I thought was going to help me, that I thought was going to get me to point B. But now I've realised that actually there's still something else that's acting as a subconscious block for me to get from A to B. And I think for a lot, well, this was my journey, and I think a lot of other people may be able to resonate with that, where what you've done what you thought you needed to do to get to a certain point, and you've realized, actually, maybe I've just been working on the surface all of this time. And then so you start to discover, what else can I actually do to rid myself of whatever? Oh my God, look at all of this iceberg that's under the surface that I wasn't even aware of, never mind addressing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got a one, haven't you? I don't know if you've shared it before or whether you feel happy to share it about, when you're driving and people are driving in careless manner. And didn't you say it really, really triggers you?
It
And
does, yeah. But and I was actually going to bring this story up, but perhaps a little bit further into the conversation, because this, I think that a lot of that story for me is also tied up to kind of like my astrology and the astrological side of things,
okay.
which
Okay.
we can bring up. But if I use, so for example, if I use another issue that's been a lifelong issue for me, and it's affected me in all areas of my life, but particularly my professional life, is I have I feel as though I have an inability to be assertive and to speak my truth.
Yes.
And that is something that I feel it professionally and personally, but it has more of a detrimental effect for me currently professionally, because it stopped me from going into a lot of things that I would have liked to have gone into. And so this is kind of what I had in mind when I was saying, you go on a journey, of being at point A and saying, okay, I am not assertive, so I need to do this, that, and the other. Oh, I'm going to do CBT. Oh, I'm going to do EFT. I'm going to do talk therapy. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And you know as well as I how many years I've been on that journey trying to
Yep.
get to the root of what is going on.
Yep.
And I've done all of that work, and I feel as though I'm probably in exactly the same position as I was when I started, or was in exactly the same position as when I started. And then that's when that real desire to get over this challenge once and for all was what opened up the world of shadow to me, because I was like, well, if I've done everything that everybody's suggesting to get over this issue, and I'm still no, further along the path, what else is there to do? And then that's when the shadow work really started to become a lot more important to me, because I was like, okay, I finally feel like I'm actually dealing with the cogs of the issue underneath the surface, rather than just trying to deal with what's sitting on the ground level that everybody sees. And I wonder how many other people come to shadow work for that reason, that they've spent so many years trying to deal with issues in the traditional manner, or the orthodox way, or the paths that we believe are the only ones open to us, when actually really probably need to be delving into the shadow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that huge number of people would identify with that. But can I ask you, have you, through doing the shadow work, have you come to some understanding as to what it is? What is your shadow telling you about this inability or this struggle you have, despite being so talented as a therapist yourself, that you struggle to work with other people?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments and the kind words on my
No,
on
but
my
it's true.
therapeutic abilities.
Everybody agrees, and you know, people find it frustrating that you're so good, but you won't put yourself out there. So, what has shadow work shown
Okay.
you?
So then let's take this in the two different ways, right? So the work that I've done for so many years has been about I can be assertive because if I say something that somebody doesn't like, that could lead to conflict, which makes me feel awkward. And it could also lead to that person not liking me anymore. So from a very logical kind of headspace, um, it's all about not wanting to upset people, and also there's something within my brain where it's hard for me to understand how people can have healthy debate or disagree and still have a normal relationship with each other. Now, I know that sounds really stupid, and people are probably going to think, what you're talking about, idiot. Friends and families have disagreements all the time. And you deal with it, you get past it, hopefully, if it's not anything too major, and the relationship goes back to how it was. For me, there's some fear within the brain that no, if I disagree with somebody in a healthy way, that's going to change our relationship forever because they're never going to see me the same way. Now, when I look at that from a shadow perspective, I realise that I feel unsafe in a lot of social situations. Now, in all honesty, I'm still on my shadow journey of exactly why that is. I think there's a lot of ancestral stuff that comes into that, which I'm working on stuff like that through family constellations, kinesiology, and stuff like that. But I'm still trying to get to the root cause of where that comes from. Is it ancestral? Is it past lives? But I'm understanding that it's in a lot of ways it's more complex than looking at the surface. But in a lot of ways it's much more simple because the one underlying emotion is I feel unsafe,
Yeah,
and that is what I have to work on a soul level of understanding that I can be seen for who I am, for my authentic self, and there will be somewhere in society that accepts me for who I am.
yeah. I mean, some of these issues must, I would think, go back to your own childhood, your own early childhood.
Yeah,
Because
but
we learn from example.
yeah. There's certainly stuff that you pick up from family members and learnt behaviours. But I was a weird kid, like I remember being 3 years old and being scared of people. And, if we met somebody on the street, I'd hide behind I'd hide behind your skirt because I wouldn't want them to see me,
Yeah,
So, yeah, there's probably a big part of that's learnt behaviour. But why did I have that so strongly as a child? I never really saw one of my family members literally hiding behind another so that I didn't have to look at somebody's face or have them say hello to me.
mm,
So it's
yeah,
multifaceted, right? And we don't
yeah,
always know exactly where that's coming from. And for me, maybe it's going to take another few months, another few years. I don't know. I mean, I hope I get to a point where I can overcome that, even if I don't understand the origin. But it's never just one layer. It's always a combination of things, which is why shadow work can be so difficult, but also so highly rewarding.
yeah. I mean, Jung pointed that out really, that for a lot of people, he found a lot of his clients would get to a certain point in their progress and then wouldn't go any further. Um, so you could argue it's not a quick fix. And when you do get the answers, they're not always easy answers to accept and then move on from. But it sounds, I mean, I don't want to get off the subject really, but it sounds like it's not only about the shadow self, is it? You've touched on, did you say something about astrology?
Yeah, well, I guess that the more you go into certain stuff, the more you start to see the connecting threads of everything, don't you? And like if you know for me what I'm like. I'm the kind of person who I see all of these different systems. I see shadow work, I see astrology, I see tarot, I see mediumship, I see neurobiology. And when I see all of those separate things, I want to understand how they all connect together and affect each other. And I think that moving forward, we have to look at things in that holistic view, because I think that's the only answer to completely understanding the conscious self and the subconscious self. Because there's the human psyche is just way too complicated for it to be explained by one system.
Yeah,
So I think there
totally
has to
agree.
be a combination. So if we go back to what you were saying about the driving, um, like it was not so bad for me until I relocated to Canada. And apologies for any Canadians that may be listening to this, but the roads here scare me so much. And in all fairness, from what I've read online, it's particularly bad in the area where I'm located for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But the drivers in my area are extremely aggressive. It's like it's almost like as soon as they get behind the wheel, that's when that's where their aggression that they've been holding in all day comes out. Somebody won't just overtake you if you're going too slow for them. They'll tailgate you. They'll hold the hand on the horn, even though they could quite easily take over you, you know, and that's purely because you're only driving 20 kilometers over the speed limit, instead of 50. So, I'm giving the drivers in this area a bad rap, but every time I go out into the car, I see people cutting each other up or shouting at each other and this aggressive driving, and it drives me crazy. And so I sat down and I thought, I have to understand where this is coming from. And through lots of different kind of avenues, there is something within my personality, my being, that is connected to that safety, but also from an astrological perspective, when you start to look at, I'm a Cancerian, I've got Scorpio rising, I think I've got the Gemini is my moon's, moon sign and stuff like that. So it's like when you look at all of that, it's very, very evident within my astrological makeup that I like justice and I like fairness and I like a sense of safety, but I also expect everybody else to have that care of safety for everybody else around them. That comes through in my astrology.
Yeah.
And so when I see people behaving dangerously on the road, it's almost like they've broken. There's a break of contract in how they're behaving and how I perceive that they should be behaving. I'm not, I'm,
Okay.
I'm not
All right.
explaining it very well.
No, 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 you are, because what it's made me think now, because I think you've said before, the way it triggers you when people drive badly is extreme where it makes you really, really angry, and it's because you think they're behaving irresponsibly, lacking in care, which feeds back to, I think, to what you said earlier about you can't disagree with somebody because you think they won't like you. So
Mhm.
maybe you associate that having a disagreement with somebody as irresponsible. Like, do you feel in some way that you're not allowed to be irresponsible? You've put that on yourself, that these people who drive badly are so irresponsible and they're not thinking about safety. Right, put that onto the situation where you can't have a disagreement with somebody because it makes you feel unsafe in that environment if you disagree with them. So, is your shadow self saying sometimes you've got to allow me to appear that I'm being irresponsible or that I'm not being as careful as you would like me to be? Because sometimes I have to rise to that challenge. I have to be able to come out of your comfort zone that you've created by not allowing me to express that side of my nature. So is it perhaps all tied in with your inability to disagree with someone and feel okay about it? Because that's a safety issue, isn't it?
I
And
mean,
a respect.
be- be- when I look at the assertiveness and the safeness thing, I think there's a lot of areas where those two overlap. But I think there's also some areas where they're very separate. And so with the assertiveness, part of the feeling of being unsafe, there's also, I have a very deep fear of not being intelligent enough. And
Mm,
so I always see if somebody has like what is considered, a high powered job or, a high status job, they could, not necessarily be super intelligent, but because I see them in that position, I immediately consider myself lower than. Or if I have a discussion with somebody and they're very, very headstrong and they have remembered lots of figures and facts and dates and names, I then consider myself less than and less intelligent. And so don't I don't have the right to engage in that debate and have my opinion considered and taken seriously, right? Like I'm not saying this for any kind of analysis or pity or anything like that. These are just my observations of what is working beneath the surface for me when I'm in those situations. Whereas when I'm in a situation and I'm on the road and people are acting unsafe, that for me is more of, I understand that those people are living their own lives. I can't expect them to live their lives to the same standards that I have. And so I have to appreciate that they're on their own journey and I'm on my own journey. And the way that they behave is nothing to do with me. I can't take responsibility or accountability for it, and I shouldn't expect them to change the way that they're behaving because that's their journey.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Just going back to this situation with the bad driving, because it's not just that they drive badly, it's that they're very aggressive and loud, which
Well,
is them.
it's more that their bad driving, it could negatively affect somebody else.
Yeah, okay. Now, there's two parts to it because it's the bad driving that could affect somebody else in terms of safety. Then there's the assertiveness in being aggressive and rude to other people, which is harmful because it's hurtful for the person who's subjected to it. But maybe there's a part of your shadow self that's saying, you know what, Sarah, I want to be like that sometimes. You don't have to be as assertive as them, but I would like to be assertive. I would like to be let out of the bag and to be able to be assertive if I want to be, but I can temper it so that I'm not to the extreme like they are, but neither am I like, so introverted with it as you are. So maybe their aggression is something that your shadow self is saying, you know what? You need a slice of that, not to the extreme.
Yeah, it could be, and that's something that I maybe have to sit with a little bit. But I think when I look at those drivers, um, I don't necessarily equate their behavior to assertiveness. Like, and this is because for me, in my mind, the people that get behind that wheel and behave that way, a lot of the time wouldn't say boo to a goose in their normal day to day, but then they get
Right.
behind the wheel and all of a sudden they think, I'm gonna drive like an absolute a-hole and not care.
Uh-huh.
And so for
Uh-huh.
me, what resonates more so than the assertiveness is you are not following the social rules and the social norms and being fair,
Yeah.
that where we're talking about that justice. Everybody
Yeah.
should, that this is why I don't like authority structures or people being treated better because they have more money or a higher status. That doesn't resonate with me. That's not justice, that's not fairness. And so that's the feeling that resonates a lot with me in those
Right.
driving situations.
Right. Okay. But as you were talking, what
Hmm.
that's thrown up for me is something else that Carl Jung talked a lot about, which is the collective shadow. So
Hmm.
we know, don't we? We shouldn't generalize, but Canadians are often referred to as, or, compared to their cousins on the other
Yeah.
side of the falls, that, they're really nice and they never
Yeah.
get angry and, and all of that. And so there's this collective shadow self that
Mm.
comes from, a socialized community that all behave in a certain way. But then for some of them, they get behind the wheel of a car
Mm.
and somehow their shadow self that's been repressed and kept down is out the bag and screaming and yelling.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah. And
there's an issue
yeah.
there for the collective, isn't there?
There is, yeah, which I think probably because, people are probably bored of listening to my my
Uh,
stories and my shadow thing. But it kind of brings that conversation back to something that I have a lot of issues with, which is the collective shadow or the collective energy. And you know what issues I have with this because I have to find within myself. I don't know how do I say this. You know what? I think people will resonate when I say when you look at the stuff that's going on in the world, the stuff that we don't like, the darker energy. In our community, we would say all of this, um, you know, turbulence and difficulties. It's part of our evolution, and we have created our reality. And that is because collectively we've put energy into something. But then when you look at the outskirts of that collective energy, there's so many people that are like, well, I don't want this to be my collective reality. This is not what I want collectively.
yeah,
Yet we're pulled into it because perhaps it's still the collective wants of the majority. So I'm still kind of working through, how do you deal with the fact that you might be one person of a smaller group that is being pulled along with a collective reality or a collective shadow that you don't want to be your truth? You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I think the starting point is uh, waking up to that fact, to that reality,
Yeah.
you know, and to be able to um, understand that as individuals, we've got the shadow self. As a collective, we have the shadow self, and just how negative that can be when it becomes suppressed, when an entire community is suppressed, and
Mm,
if we understand that, because I think for me, one of the big things is there are people, a lot of people today would look at what happened in Nazi Germany and say, I could never be a part of that.
mm-hmm,
You know, I would be one of those people in my community or my street that would never have reported on Jewish people or gay people or whoever didn't fit the Nazi agenda. I would go out my way to protect them.
mm-hmm.
And I think everybody would like to say, I'm in that camp, you know,
Yeah.
I'm the
Yeah.
brave one. But in reality, we have to accept that ain't true. We've only got to look at COVID, how COVID was dealt with. Look at the animosity. Look at
Mm.
how neighbours within
Oh, well,
families.
it was extremely divisive, like without getting into the politics of one side or the other. I have friends who say there's people that are no longer in their lives because of that time.
Yes.
Friends and family that still haven't reconciled. From that period of time.
Yeah, and we all remember, don't we? People twitching the curtains, and looking in dismay at the neighbour who went out twice
Yeah,
that day when they should have only had one walk. And, they didn't keep what was it, 6 feet away?
yeah.
And it was like collective hysteria. And that to me, if I had any doubts before that Nazi Germany could happen again and again and again, COVID showed me in a small way, you know what? We haven't gone that far from, being savages, you know. And haven't we said before, what stops human beings from being beasts and, no better than animals, hunter gatherers? And it's electricity. Turn off the lights.
Yeah.
And before long, or what's the other thing that happens? There's no electricity for 12 hours, and in that time the supermarket's empty, everyone's scared, they're all preparing for Armageddon.
So before, how many would it be? Would it be 24 hours, or how long would it take for people to actually start looting? Well,
Yes,
I mean, they've had that over the past couple of years, in areas where they've had power go out. It's people really jump on the opportunity to start looting straight away, don't they? Um,
yes,
but
yeah.
that
And where's that
discussion,
coming from? Where's it
well,
coming from?
Well, this discussion actually, you said something that I think is very important when you were saying if the shadow is repressed,
Yes,
how does it come out? And this, I think this was one of Jung's arguments again, wasn't it? It was like, if you have a shadow self, you can't get away from that fact, and you can't I don't think that you can get rid of the shadow self within this lifetime because, as I've said before, we live in a universe of duality. We have light, we have
yeah,
dark,
yeah,
we have the opposing forces, and that's within us as well. So we have the self and we have the shadow self. That's not going to change. And so the more we repress it, the stronger it becomes. And it's only when we acknowledge that it's there and actually allow it to be integrated within ourselves that we become a much more whole self and a much more balanced self. And I guess that, it's that whole thing, isn't it, of way back in the day with the well, I think this maybe is the reality still for a lot of people on the planet, but when people were not able to be open about who they were sexually, or whether they had views that were not aligned with the church, or just something
Yes, yes,
that made
yeah,
somebody different. And when that self was repressed, it would come
yes,
out in all sorts of ways, when you're not
yes,
being true to the self. And by no means am I saying that any kind of sexual orientation is the shadow self. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about the repression of who you are, the repression of your authentic self.
yes,
But
yeah,
it's the same in the shadow, because that shadow is part of your authentic self. So if you are trying to suppress thicker, denser energies, as
hmm,
we were saying, the jealousy, the fear, the anger, how does that manifest then in your day-to-day life?
yeah. Well, I mean, my views about the Catholic faith, and I don't know, upset people out there who are Catholics, but my personal view is that priests should be allowed to marry because um, it it can tend to lean towards suppressed and repressed sexual desire.
Mm.
And we know what's happened in the past, don't we?
Oh yeah.
When
Yeah.
sexual desires are repressed and
Yeah.
you're being told to be something you're not, and
Hmm.
within this community, within this religious community, if they were allowed to have relationships, intimate relationships, that sexual energy is probably positive. It's staged just what it's meant to be, a
Mm.
beautiful sexual energy. Suppress
Manifest
it.
it is the energy of manifestation, is
Yes.
sexual energy
Yeah. So you
creation. Yeah.
suppress it, and then you're surprised at what you get. And I would argue right now at this moment, particularly in the Western world, that the collective shadow self is being severely repressed. People are not allowed to express any opinions that differ,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I mean
from the
that.
mainstream.
I'm glad you've said that, because it reminded me of one of the things I was going to say earlier, where do you feel as though, I don't know how conscious this was, but I almost feel as though the shadow self is vilified, so that people are encouraged to suppress those feelings rather than
Yes.
acknowledge them and bring them out.
Yeah.
Why? Because if we suppress them, we're less of a whole person. We understand ourselves less. We understand
Yes.
our path less. We're much less tolerant and accepting of other people and other people's shadows. So,
Yes.
do we think that unconsciously or consciously we're encouraged to not be doing that work?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I think ultimately it becomes um, the work of division, divide and
Yeah.
conquer and rule, and
Hmm.
have everybody policing one another. As we said earlier about COVID, that was a form of policing your neighbour and your friends and your family.
Yeah.
And that's what they would like us to do. We won't talk about who they are because we don't want to get but we all know that, don't we? And I think that's why there's so much mental unwellness at the moment, don't you? I've never known it be
Yeah.
so bad. And
Yeah.
physical.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, what manifests emotionally is gonna manifest mentally and physically, right? It's all
Yes.
connected in every way. And yeah, it's an amazing way to divide people. I mean, if we look at it on something we've spoken about before with the generational war, and how within the media they are constantly trying to pit like millennials against baby boomers and stuff like that. And that's all about the division of, look what you've done that makes my life more difficult, or look what you're doing that's going to ruin mankind, because you're not doing it the way that we've done it. And it's all about finding differences, finding something that we can point the finger at, rather than saying, okay, where is this distaste and this dislike for this generation coming from, and what is it reflecting within myself? Because then when you're doing that, you're actually connecting with something that's deeper, you're connecting with something that's beyond ourselves, rather than maintaining the battle within our own society.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, I mean, gosh, we've in a way connected a lot of other things, talking about the shadow self, going from us as individuals to within families. I mean,
Mm,
we hadn't really touched upon families. We went straight to individual, to kind of communities.
collective, yeah.
But yes, but within the family, and you look at the shadow work that needs to be done there. And I would argue as well, see if you agree with this, that there's parts of the shadow self that with certain family members, that let's say confidence, the part of you that wants to be more confident can be more confident with that particular sibling or that particular parent and uncle, cousin. But then when you're with somebody else within the same family, that shadow self, that confident part of your shadow will will suppress itself because it
Hmm.
knows, there's conflict with that person. I don't feel
Yeah,
safe.
yeah.
So even within the family, your shadow self expresses itself in different ways with different people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which then leads you down a whole load of different paths, because it takes you down the, why do I only have this shadow, presenting itself with this person? What is it within that person's history, that's affecting the frequency? I think the shadow permeates every single element of our life. I think it's that
Yes.
important,
Yes.
and when people talk about prana, chi, the force, the flow, basically the flow of energy that permeates everything and everyone and is everywhere. I feel as though that the shadow is there too. If you consider that the force connects everything like the pith of an orange, if we do live in a universe of duality, that life force has to have its equivalent. And is the shadow that equivalent? Does the shadow permeate everything in exactly the same way as prana or chi? But it's just
Yes.
the other side of the coin of that,
Yeah.
So I think it permeates everything.
Yeah. Now you've just given me a thought, bringing it back to, like the individual rather than the collective and beyond.
Mhm,
If we stop thinking of the shadow as a shadow, because shadow has a number of negative connotations still, doesn't it?
mhm,
But if we want to um, think of it more positively, we could see the shadow as our twin. And there's this story about, oh, the good twin, the bad twin.
yeah, yeah.
She's a lovely, beautiful one, and the other one's really badly behaved and all of that. Well, in
Yeah.
a way, that's like a version of us. So maybe we should start to say, well, what would my twin think about
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
What do you think, twin? Why am I being triggered by that a-hole? You
Yeah.
know, why is it that I had a disagreement and 3 days later I'm still arguing with myself? What do you think, twin?
Well, and also that brings up a good point. I'm not saying that this is everybody's reality, but it's quite often portrayed this way in films and TV shows. You know, when you said maybe you have the twins and one's considered the beautiful,
Yeah.
funny, intelligent one, and the other one's like, something that's crawled out from under a rock. Well, perhaps the issue there is which twin has been given the most attention throughout their life.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
is the shadow only perceived as that under the rock twin because it's not had any attention?
Yeah.
It's not had
Yeah.
the attention it deserves, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Because then, of course, when you think we know people that you think they don't have any shadow because they're just like they're out there, they say what they want, they don't care. They seem super confident and blah blah blah. But then when you really get to know that person, they'll often say, "Yeah, but that's not really me."
Mm,
You know,
mhm.
inside I'm like the tears of a clown. On the
Yeah,
outside, I'm this way. Inside, I'm crying.
yeah.
So, maybe that's when all those shadow parts of the self have been let out, and not brought under any control at all, or that, there's that imbalance.
Well,
It's the imbalance.
I'll tell you who I believe, and obviously I don't know all the details, but I believe a fantastic example of that is Robin Williams. And you get that a lot with
Yes.
comedians and the people that are
Yes.
out there, right? Because they have on the outside, they make everybody in the room laugh. They've always got this incredible bubbly personality. But what are they doing? They're completely suppressing that shadow self so that when they go home and close the door, it comes out with a vengeance. And then
Yes.
that's when that leads to, obviously Robin Williams felt like he couldn't continue living on
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
plane because he was dealing with such chronic depression that he
Yeah.
didn't show anybody else. And so is that a cautionary tale as to the devastating effects when you suppress part of yourself so much? Perhaps there's a lot of complex issues with stuff like that, but perhaps if somebody feels as though they have an outlet for that and they're acknowledging those feelings and they're actually allowing them to come to the surface, perhaps it doesn't lay so heavily on their shoulders when they are alone, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Ah.
food for
Wow.
thought.
Yes, a lot of food for thought.
And so to bring it to a close then, because we're coming to time, tell us what's your continuing relationship going to be with the shadow then, seeing as that it's still relatively new to you and you're kind of still dipping your toe into it a little bit. Where are you going to take your shadow journey next?
Well, there's a big piece of my shadow that I've identified it as misjudgment. I think,
Hmm.
I mean, look at me, I'm like an old lady now, and I'm still affected by some things that happened in my childhood that I thought, oh, you left them way behind. But being misjudged, I think, as a dual heritage person growing up in the 50s and 60s, I
Hmm.
was taught, if I upset an adult, they'd often say, oh, you've got a chip on your shoulder because of your colour, you
Mm.
know?
Mm.
And I think, and looking back, I realized that I was being misjudged so many times
Mm,
because people didn't want to hear what I was saying. All they saw was that I was this mixed race kid or this mixed race woman, and therefore I must have had a chip on my shoulder for something they perceived as a real negative. And
yeah.
I've carried that through now because I absolutely get triggered if somebody misjudges me,
Mm,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, and not only the mixed race thing, but also just being misjudged as a child, because we often dismiss children, don't we? And or
Oh,
what they're
God,
saying,
yeah.
it doesn't hold as much weight. So,
Yes.
which is a massive misjudgment. And so you had those two elements really. Being
Yes.
a
Yeah.
person of color in the 50s and 60s, but then also being a child as well. So it's
Mm,
kind of like
mm.
that double whammy. So
Yeah.
so that's going to
Yeah.
be your next project
Yeah,
for
it
yourself.
is. Yeah, because I got triggered by that one just a few weeks ago,
Yeah,
and so what it did make me do is to go back to that time and say, right, what was it? Ah, yeah, because that person misjudged you,
yeah.
and that goes back to childhood and not feeling
Mm.
valued.
That will be an interesting update to get from you then on how that's going
Yes,
next time we
yes.
connect.
I might ask you the same question.
Yeah. What's next for me?
Yes.
Well, as I said, for me, the big thing that is holding me back in life is this inability to be assertive, and so
Yeah,
that's kind of
that's
what my
ongoing.
energy is focused on right now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a big one, that's probably going to take some time, but yeah, that's next on my list.
I
So.
did wonder, just before we close, whether it was something I know I was taught to do at university, and we were made to have a discussion with somebody, but we had to put forward a view that we didn't believe in. Like
Mm,
they, for example, make it simple. Like, well, it's not simple; it's a serious issue. But somebody might be, say, anti-abortion, and
mhm.
somebody's pro-abortion. If you're pro-abortion, you had to argue the opposite,
Yeah.
you know, and go through all the kind of discomfort of not being true to yourself, but at the same time trying to put forward a logical argument so that you could see the other person's point of view and where they were coming from. But going through that kind of, I don't know, I think we all came away feeling more confident about confrontation and about disagreeing.
It's like the kids, isn't it? In that we don't really have it in the British schools, but like the debate society and stuff like that, where you're
Yes.
given a topic, it might not necessarily be a point of view that you agree with, but you have to research it and argue it. Um, that in itself is actually something that I've been through before in the past, and
Okay.
do you know what it is with me when you said, oh, you have to get comfortable with arguing or giving a point that it's not your truth, but
Yeah.
that's been my whole life.
Yeah.
My whole life is communicating something that's not my truth because I'm hiding who I am.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
it's,
get that. Yeah.
so, but I will keep you updated on my progress because perhaps
Yes.
that, there's other people out there that are dealing with the same thing, and, what I
Yeah.
experience and go through might be of use to other people. So I'll definitely be keeping you updated on the progress of that.
And if anyone's listening and they're in the same situation and something's helped them, please let
Mm.
us know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're always open to hearing different perspectives there. So
Yes,
it's
we are.
something that's like gold dust nowadays. Oh,
Oh, definitely. Yep.
opposing opinions. Ooh.
Ooh, scary, scary. Can't go there anymore.
Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up our huge conversation on shadow. Of course, it's only been, dipping our toe into it, and as we always say, this is, very much based on our opinions and experiences rather than speaking from a place of authority. But
Yes.
hopefully, we always hope that people get something out of the conversations here, and hope that it leads to maybe more conversations with your friends and loved ones. So we will leave it there for today. Um, we are sending our love to each and every one of you. Thank you for listening. Make sure that you tune into previous podcasts and future. And anything you want to say, Mum, before we sign off?
Um, I don't think so. Just, try and be safe, try to be happy, and just send love out there to yourself and to everybody else. It's a beautiful world.
Amen.
Bye for now.
Bye for now. Bye.